school bell rang loudly, echoing through the long hallways of Lincoln High School. It was the first Monday of the new semester, and students were rushing to their classes, chatting, laughing, and sharing stories about their weekend. Among all that noise and excitement, one boy quietly walked through the main gate holding a small old backpack and a folded piece of paper that had his class schedule written on it. His name was Marcus Johnson. Marcus had just moved to this town with his mother a few weeks ago. They didn't have much, but his mother always told him, "You don't need to have everything, Marcus. You just need to believe in yourself." She worked 2 jobs to make sure he could attend a good school, even though they lived in a small rented apartment across town. Marcus was grateful, but starting over in a new school was never easy for him. He was shy, quiet, and didn't know anyone here. As Marcus walked through the hallway, he could feel eyes turning toward him. Some students whispered, some just stared, curious about the new kid. He wasn't dressed in the latest fashion like the others. His shoes were a little worn out, and his backpack looked like it had been used for years. Still, Marcus walked with calmness, trying not to let the stares bother him. When he reached his classroom, he quietly knocked on the door. The teacher, Mrs. Anderson, smiled and welcomed him in. "Class, we have a new student joining us today," she said warmly. "Everyone, this is Marcus Johnson." A few students nodded politely while others went back to their phones or whispered to each other. Marcus simply gave a small smile and found a seat in the back corner of the room. He didn't like attention. All he wanted was to blend in and get through the day quietly. But even as he tried to stay invisible, one thing about Marcus stood out. Inside his backpack, he carried a small notebook filled with music notes and sketches of piano keys. It was something he had kept with him since he was 9 years old, the year his father had passed away. His father used to be a local musician who taught Marcus everything about music and piano. Playing piano wasn't just a hobby for Marcus, it was his connection to his father, his safe place, his escape from the world. During lunch break, Marcus sat alone under a tree near the schoolyard. He opened his notebook and started writing down a few notes from a melody that had been stuck in his head all morning. The sound of students laughing in groups surrounded him, but he didn't mind. Music was his comfort. A few boys from his class noticed him sitting alone and decided to walk over. One of them, Jason, said with a smirk, "Hey, new kid, what's that? Some secret diary?" The others laughed. Marcus looked up, smiled faintly, and said softly, "Just music." "Music? You mean like rap or something?" Jason asked mockingly. "No," Marcus replied. "Piano music." The boys exchanged glances and chuckled. "A piano? What are you, some kind of genius?" Jason said sarcastically. Marcus didn't respond. He had faced teasing before in his old school too, and he had learned that sometimes silence was stronger than words. Later that day, Marcus passed by the school auditorium on his way home. Through the open door, he could see a large black piano sitting on the stage, covered in dust. His heart skipped a beat. It reminded him of the old piano his father used to play. He wanted to go inside, sit there, and touch those keys, but he didn't. He was new here and he didn't want to cause any trouble. So he just stood there for a moment, staring quietly, then walked away. At home that evening, Marcus helped his mother with dinner. She noticed he seemed quiet and asked, "How was your first day, baby?" "It was okay," he said softly. "The school's big, and they have a piano." Her face lit up. "A piano? That's wonderful. Maybe you can join the music club." Marcus shook his head. "I don't think they'd want me there." His mother smiled sadly but said, "Marcus, you never know what doors God can open for you. Just keep being yourself." He nodded, pretending to agree, but deep inside he wasn't sure. He had seen how students looked at him, like he didn't belong. Still, as he sat by the window that night, he opened his notebook again and started drawing more notes. The moonlight fell on the paper, and the gentle hum of his mother's voice singing in the kitchen made him smile a little. For Marcus, music wasn't about showing off or proving anything. It was his way of speaking without words, and even though no one at school knew it yet, there was greatness inside him waiting to be discovered, something that would one day leave everyone speechless. Little did Marcus know that very soon, his quiet nature and hidden talent would take center stage in front of the entire school. The same people who ignored him would soon be cheering his name. But for now, he was just the new student, humble, quiet, and carrying a dream that was about to change everything. The week passed slowly for Marcus. He had started to get used to his new school, but not in the way he hoped. Most days he sat quietly in the back of his classes, did his work neatly, and kept to himself. A few students were friendly, but most still saw him as the new kid. He rarely spoke unless a teacher asked him something. Every time he passed the music room or the auditorium, he'd glance through the glass window at the dusty piano and imagine himself playing it, just once. One chilly Friday morning, the principal announced a special school assembly. It was meant to be a fun Friday, where students could perform, teachers could share stories, and the principal would give his usual speech. For Marcus, it was just another day to stay invisible. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as hundreds of students filled the seats. The principal, Mr. Reynolds, stood at the front with his microphone, wearing his usual suit and an overly confident smile. Mr. Reynolds had a reputation. He liked to make jokes, sometimes at other people's expense. He called it humor, but not everyone found it funny. As the performances began, a few songs, a short skit, and some dance routines, Marcus sat quietly in the audience. He clapped politely for everyone, but his mind was somewhere else. He was thinking about his mother's words. You never know what doors God can open for you. Then, something unexpected happened. During a break between acts, the piano on the stage caught the principal's eye. He tapped the microphone and said jokingly, "Well, seems like no one's brave enough to touch that piano today." The audience laughed lightly. Then, scanning the crowd, his gaze stopped on Marcus, who was sitting near the back row, alone as usual. Mr. Reynolds smiled, that kind of smile people get when they're about to make a joke. "Hey, you there," he said, pointing at Marcus. The crowd turned their heads to look. Marcus froze, unsure if the principal was really talking to him. "Yes, you, the new student. Why don't you come up here and play something for us?" The students began whispering. Some laughed under their breath. A few even clapped mockingly, encouraging the idea. Marcus's heart started to race. He could feel hundreds of eyes staring at him. He didn't know what to do. Should he say no? Should he go up? Was this serious or just a joke? The principal grinned, clearly enjoying the attention. "Come on, son," he said. "Don't be shy. Let's see what you've got." Marcus slowly stood up. His legs felt heavy, his hands slightly shaking. The room was filled with mixed laughter and whispers. Some students thought this was going to be funny. Others looked curious, waiting to see what would happen next. As he walked toward the stage, every step felt longer than the last. The wooden floor creaked beneath his shoes. He climbed the small stairs and stood near the piano, his reflection shining faintly on its polished surface. The lights felt too bright. The silence in the room grew heavier. Mr. Reynolds leaned toward the microphone and said with a chuckle, "Now, everyone, let's give a warm welcome to our new pianist." The audience clapped half-jokingly. Marcus glanced at the principal for a moment, and in that instant he understood. It wasn't an invitation. It was a prank. The principal didn't believe he could play. He just wanted to get a laugh from the students. Marcus looked down at the piano keys. They were slightly dusty, untouched for months. He gently wiped them with his sleeve. His hands hovered above them for a moment, trembling slightly. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Somewhere in his heart he could almost hear his father's voice saying, "Music isn't about them, son. It's about you. It's your story." He sat down on the piano bench. The room fell silent. Even the giggles faded. Everyone waited, some expecting a disaster, others simply curious. For a few seconds, Marcus didn't move. He just breathed slowly, letting his nerves settle. Then, without another word, he began to play. The first note was soft, almost fragile. Then another followed, deeper, stronger, filled with emotion. Within moments, the sound grew, echoing through the large hall. The melody wasn't something from a famous composer. It was his own, a piece he had written for his father years ago. The crowd that had been laughing seconds ago was now completely still. The sound of the piano wrapped around the room like magic, gentle but powerful. Each note carried a story of pain, love, and hope. Marcus forgot about the stares, the jokes, and even the principal. In that moment, it was just him and the piano, telling the world everything he had never said out loud. When he finally lifted his hands from the keys, there was complete silence. Not a whisper, not a giggle, just hundreds of stunned faces staring at him. Marcus stood up quietly, ready to walk back to his seat. But before he could move, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. Students stood, Teachers clapped. And for the first time since coming to Lincoln High, Marcus saw something different in their eyes. Respect. Even the principal was speechless, his confident smile gone. He looked at Marcus like he had just witnessed something he would never forget. Marcus didn't need to say anything. He just gave a small nod and walked back to his seat, his notebook safely tucked under his arm. That day, the prank meant to embarrass him became the moment that changed everything. For a few long seconds after Marcus stopped playing, the entire auditorium felt frozen in time. The sound of the last note still hung in the air like a whisper that no one dared to break. Hundreds of students sat motionless, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. The boy who had walked onto that stage as the subject of a joke now stood in front of them as someone entirely different. Marcus didn't look proud or angry. He just stood there quietly, his hands resting at his sides, his heart still racing from the music that had poured out of him like a secret finally told. The silence was strange, heavy, but beautiful. For the first time since he had entered that school, no one was whispering about him. No one was laughing. They were all simply speechless. Mr. Reynolds, the principal, stood behind the microphone, completely caught off guard. He had expected awkward fumbling or maybe a few random notes, something to make the crowd laugh. But what he'd just witnessed was something far from that. His face had lost its confident grin. He didn't even realize that he was still holding the microphone near his mouth, unable to speak. Marcus took a small step back from the piano, glancing at the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd, students, teachers, even the janitor standing in the back, all staring at him in disbelief. He didn't know whether to smile or say something, so he just gave a quiet nod and started to walk off the stage. That's when someone in the crowd began to clap. It started softly, just one pair of hands. Then another joined in, and another until the whole room filled with thunderous applause. Students were on their feet cheering. Some shouted, "Wow!" while others just clapped as if they couldn't find the right words. Marcus stopped for a moment on the steps of the stage, turning slightly to look back. He wasn't used to being noticed like this. He didn't know how to react. All he could do was smile shyly and give a little wave before heading toward his seat. As he sat down, the noise of applause still echoing, the students around him looked at him differently now. A few of the same kids who had laughed earlier were now whispering things like, "Dude, that was amazing," and "How did he even play like that?" Even Jason, the boy who had teased him by the tree days ago, leaned forward and said under his breath, "Man, that was insane. You're actually really good." Marcus simply smiled and nodded, still catching his breath. Inside, he felt something new. Not pride exactly, but peace. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen for who he truly was. Meanwhile, the principal cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "Wow," he said slowly, his voice slightly shaky, that was quite unexpected. The crowd laughed softly, but not at Marcus this time. Everyone could sense the shift. The power in the room no longer belonged to the man on the stage. It belonged to the boy who had just played. Mr. Reynolds adjusted his tie awkwardly and added, "Let's give another round of applause for Marcus Johnson." The cheers grew even louder. After the assembly ended, students crowded around Marcus as he walked through the hallways. Some asked questions, some just wanted to say "great job," and others simply looked at him with awe. But Marcus stayed humble, thanking everyone quietly and keeping his notebook close to his chest. By the time he reached his last class of the day, even teachers were talking about him. His music teacher, Mrs. Evans, found him after class and said softly, "Marcus, I had no idea you played like that. You've got a real gift," he smiled shyly. "Thank you, ma'am. I just play what I feel." That night when Marcus came home, his mother immediately noticed something different in his face. His eyes had that spark she hadn't seen in a long time. "How was school today, baby?" she asked, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. Marcus smiled wider than he had all week. "It was good," he said simply. "Really good," she turned, raising an eyebrow. "What happened?" He shrugged and said, "I played the piano at school." Her eyes lit up instantly. "You did? How did that happen?" He laughed softly, shaking his head. "It's a long story, Mama, but I think people finally heard me." She walked over, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "See? I told you. Never hide your light, son." Marcus spent the rest of the evening sitting by the small window in their apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His notebook lay open beside him, and his fingers tapped softly on the windowsill like they were still playing invisible keys. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe things would go back to normal. Maybe they wouldn't. But for now he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that what happened today wasn't just luck. It was the beginning of something bigger, a moment that had turned silence into music and laughter into respect. The awkward silence that had once been meant to humiliate him had become the silence of awe, the kind that happens when the world finally witnesses something beautiful. The next morning, the whole school buzzed with excitement. What had happened in the auditorium the day before was now the only topic everyone was talking about. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, even on social media, people couldn't stop mentioning the new kid who played the piano like a professional. Marcus had gone from being invisible to being the most talked about student overnight. But he didn't walk around with pride or arrogance. In fact, he kept his same quiet smile, his same calm steps, and his same old notebook under his arm. To him, nothing had really changed inside. He just did what he loved. Still, deep down, something had changed. For the first time, Marcus felt seen. The same students who once ignored him now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers who barely noticed him before now smiled warmly when he entered their class. Even the janitor gave him a thumbs up when they passed each other that morning. But not everyone saw the moment the same way. The person most affected and most unsettled was Principal Reynolds. He sat in his office that morning, replaying the memory in his mind over and over again. The laughter, the challenge, the music, and then the silence that followed. He had meant it all as a harmless joke, just a bit of fun to make the students laugh. But instead, he had ended up humiliating himself and unintentionally creating the most powerful moment the school had seen in years. He couldn't shake the guilt that weighed on him. The image of Marcus standing on that stage, confident yet humble, haunted him. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Reynolds realized he had been wrong, not just about Marcus, but about the way he treated people he didn't understand. By lunchtime, he made a decision. He called Marcus to his office. When Marcus arrived, he was nervous. He wasn't sure if he was in trouble or being praised. He stood quietly by the door until the principal gestured for him to sit down. "Marcus," Mr. Reynolds began, clearing his throat. "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." The principal took a deep breath and said, "First, I owe you an apology. What I did yesterday was unprofessional and wrong. I called you up there as a joke, and I'll admit that, but what you did, it was extraordinary. You turned my mistake into something beautiful." Marcus looked surprised. He hadn't expected those words. He quietly said, "It's okay, sir." Mr. Reynolds shook his head. "No, it's not okay. I embarrassed you in front of everyone, and you responded with grace and talent instead of anger. You taught this entire school, including me, a lesson I won't forget." Marcus stayed silent, his eyes calm but kind. After a moment, the principal continued, "Marcus, would you consider playing at the school's Spring Talent Showcase next month? I think your performance deserves to be seen again, properly this time. Not as a joke, but as something real." Marcus hesitated. The thought of standing on stage again in front of the entire school made his heart race, but in a different way this time. It wasn't fear. It was a challenge. He thought about his father, about his mother's words, about the dusty piano that had once looked unreachable. And for the first time, he realized this was his chance not just to play again, but to share something meaningful. He looked up at the principal and said softly, "Yes, sir, I'll do it." The principal smiled, not the fake, forced smile he used on stage, but a genuine one. "Good," he said. "And Marcus, thank you. You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." As Marcus left the office, the sunlight through the hallway windows felt warmer. His heart felt light and a small smile played on his lips. That evening, when he got home, his mother noticed his good mood. "You're glowing again," she teased. "What happened this time?" Marcus laughed. "The principal asked me to play at the spring showcase." Her eyes widened with pride. "See? I told you, baby. When you share your gift, doors open." He nodded, sitting by the window again, his notebook open. But this time he didn't just write notes. He began composing something new, a song about everything that had happened, from the moment he entered Lincoln High to that unforgettable day on stage. He wanted the next performance to be different, not just beautiful, but honest. He wanted it to tell his story of being judged, misunderstood, and finally seen. Over the next few weeks, Marcus spent every spare moment practicing, sometimes in the music room during lunch, sometimes late at night at home using an old keyboard his father left behind. His fingers moved like they were telling secrets only music could reveal. The more he practiced, the more confident he became. But deep inside, he wasn't just preparing for the show. He was preparing to face everything that once made him doubt himself. And in some quiet way, so was the principal. Mr. Reynolds began spending more time with students, listening more, joking less. He even started coming by the music room to check on Marcus's progress, always leaving with a quiet smile. Everyone at school was looking forward to the spring showcase. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The moment Marcus would touch those piano keys again, something incredible was going to happen. The boy who once sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria was about to step into the spotlight once more. Not because of a prank this time, but because of a choice he made on his own, and that decision, quiet, brave, and unexpected, was the beginning of everything that would come next. The day of the spring talent showcase finally arrived. For weeks, Marcus had been practicing non-stop, early mornings before school, late nights after homework, and every quiet moment in between. The piano had become more than an instrument to him. It was his voice, his story, his truth. Every note he played carried a piece of who he was. The shy boy who had once been laughed at, the son who still remembered his father's melodies, and the dreamer who refused to give up. That morning, Lincoln High was buzzing with excitement. Posters covered the hallways. The gym was decorated with colorful lights, and students rushed about preparing for their performances. Everyone was talking about the same thing. Marcus Johnson is performing again. Some couldn't wait to hear him. Others were simply curious. But deep down, everyone knew that when Marcus played, something magical happened. Backstage, Marcus sat quietly beside the piano, his fingers resting gently on his notebook. He had written a new song, one that told his story. He titled it The First Note. It wasn't just about music. It was about beginnings. The first step, the first dream, the first time he truly believed in himself. The auditorium filled up quickly. Parents, teachers, and students took their seats. Even the principal, Mr. Reynolds, looked unusually nervous. He had promised Marcus that today would be different. No jokes, no pressure, no tricks. Just pure respect for his talent. Marcus's mother sat in the second row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes shining with quiet pride. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one she saved for special days. Today was one of those days. As the show began, different students took turns performing. There were dancers, singers, poets, and even a comedy act. The crowd cheered for each of them, but everyone seemed to be waiting for one performance, Marcus's. Finally, after a short intermission, the stage lights dimmed slightly. The host walked up to the microphone and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you all remember what happened a few weeks ago. A moment that none of us will ever forget. Well, tonight, we have the honor of hearing that young man play again. Please welcome Marcus Johnson." The audience clapped loudly, the sound echoing through the room. Marcus took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and walked toward the stage. His heart thumped like a drum in his chest, but his steps were steady. He sat down at the piano, the same one he had played before, only this time it wasn't dusty or forgotten. Someone had polished it. It gleamed under the lights, waiting for him. He looked out into the crowd and saw his mother's eyes. She gave him a soft nod, the kind that said, "You've got this." Marcus closed his eyes and let the world fade away. For a brief second, there was complete silence. The kind of silence that's almost sacred, the calm before something beautiful begins. Then his fingers touched the keys. The first note broke the stillness like a sunrise breaking the dark. It was gentle, fragile, but filled with life. The melody that followed was unlike anything the audience had ever heard before. It was emotional, raw, and pure, a mixture of pain and hope, sorrow and triumph. Each note told a part of his journey. The loneliness of being the new kid, the laughter that had stung, the memory of his father teaching him how to play, the moment when he was told to perform as a joke, and the strength it took to turn that moment into something powerful. The music swelled and dipped like waves, sometimes soft as a whisper, sometimes bold as thunder. It carried the weight of every unspoken word he had ever wanted to say. The audience sat frozen, completely mesmerized. Some closed their eyes to feel the music. Some had tears rolling down their cheeks without even realizing it. The piano wasn't just singing, it was speaking. Even the principal felt his throat tighten. For the first time in years, he saw what true courage looked like. Not loud, not angry, but quiet and strong. Marcus's mother pressed her hand to her heart. She had always known her son was special. But seeing him there, shining in front of everyone, made her eyes well with tears. As the song reached its final note, Marcus slowed down, letting his fingers hover above the keys for just a second longer. Then softly he pressed the last key, a single note that echoed through the auditorium and then faded into silence. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was sacred, the kind of silence that only comes after something truly beautiful. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted into applause. Students jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Teachers stood, wiping tears from their eyes. His mother stood too, clapping harder than anyone. Marcus smiled. Not a big smile, but a small, peaceful one. He stood up, gave a polite bow, and glanced toward the principal. Mr. Reynolds was already on his feet, applauding with genuine pride. That moment didn't just belong to Marcus. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, laughed at, or told they couldn't do something. Because sometimes, all it takes is one first note to change how the world hears you. As Marcus walked off the stage, his heart was calm. He knew this wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning. The first note of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The next few days at Lincoln High felt different, almost like the air itself had changed. Something had shifted in the hallways, in the classrooms, even in the way people looked at each other. And at the heart of that change was one boy, Marcus Johnson. Ever since the night of the Spring Talent Showcase, the story of his performance had spread like wildfire. Students posted videos of him playing, and within hours they went viral online. Hundreds of comments poured in. This gave me chills. I cried listening to this. That boy has a gift from God. Marcus didn't even know at first that he was trending. He was still the same humble, quiet boy. When he walked through the school doors the next morning, he didn't expect what he saw. Students were waiting for him, smiling, clapping, some even patting his shoulder as he passed. "Hey Marcus, you were amazing last night," one girl said. "That song, it was unreal," said another. He didn't know how to react. He just smiled shyly and said, "Thank you." For the first time, people weren't whispering behind his back, and they were speaking to him. The same students who once ignored him now saved him a seat at lunch, asked him about his music, and treated him with genuine respect. Even teachers were different. His math teacher told him, "I watched your video last night with my kids. They loved it." His English teacher said, "You've reminded everyone here what passion really looks like." But the biggest transformation wasn't how others saw him. It was how Marcus saw himself. He had always believed in his music, but now he understood something deeper. His gift wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about touching hearts, healing wounds, and making people feel something real. That was power, not the loud kind, but the quiet, timeless kind that stays with people. One afternoon, the principal, Mr. Reynolds, called Marcus to his office again. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The moment Marcus walked in, the principal stood and greeted him with a smile. "Marcus," he said warmly, "do you know how many emails I've received since the showcase? Reporters, schools, music programs, and they all want to know about you." Marcus's eyes widened. "Really?" Mr. Reynolds nodded. "Yes, son. You've become an inspiration, not just here, but beyond. But more than that, you've changed this school." Marcus tilted his head slightly. Unsure what he meant, the principal continued, "Before you came, there was division here, groups, cliques, people judging others for how they looked or talked. But after your performance, something shifted. You reminded everyone that talent, kindness, and heart don't come with labels. You made us all stop and think." Marcus looked down, a little embarrassed but deeply moved. "I didn't mean to change anything, sir," he said softly. I just played, Mr. Reynolds smiled. Exactly. That's what makes it special. You didn't try to prove anyone wrong. You just let your truth speak. That evening, Marcus went home feeling lighter than he ever had before. His mother was waiting for him at the door, holding her phone with teary eyes. Baby, she said, her voice trembling. Have you seen this? She showed him a video on social media. It was his performance. It already had hundreds of thousands of views. Comments from people all around the country filled the screen. This made me believe in myself again. That boy is going to change the world. This story gave me goosebumps. Marcus smiled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. That's crazy, he whispered. His mother wrapped her arms around him. No, baby, she said gently. That's God showing you your purpose. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat by his small window looking up at the stars. He thought about everything, the laughter, the embarrassment, the first time he touched those piano keys, and how all of it led to this. He realized something important. Sometimes, life tests you not to break you, but to show you who you really are. That day when he was called on stage as a joke had felt like the worst moment of his life. But now, he could see it clearly. That moment had been his turning point. The same stage that was meant to humiliate him had become the place where he found his voice. From that day on, Marcus wasn't just the new kid anymore. He became a symbol of hope, not only for students at Lincoln High but for anyone who had ever been underestimated or made to feel small. The school even started a new program, Voices of Talent, an open stage event inspired by Marcus's story, where any student could share their skills without fear of judgment. The principal personally invited Marcus to perform at its first event. When he walked through the halls now, people didn't see him as quiet or strange. They saw him as the boy who turned a cruel joke into a masterpiece, and Marcus, he remained humble. He still carried his old notebook, still sat under the same tree during lunch, sometimes sketching music notes while humming to himself. But now when people passed by, they didn't laugh. They stopped, listened, and smiled because they knew behind that quiet smile was a melody that had changed everything. The boy who once hid in silence had become the reason everyone finally listened. Few weeks after the spring showcase, Lincoln High felt brighter than ever. The atmosphere was alive with energy, hope, and something new: respect. For the first time in a long while, students were kind to one another. They spoke with encouragement, they listened, and they believed, and the name on everyone's lips was still the same: Marcus Johnson. He had become more than a student. He had become a story and a symbol. Teachers shared his journey in their lessons. Students quoted his words in essays. Even the local newspaper had written an article titled, "From Joke to Genius, the Boy Who Taught a School to Listen." But Marcus didn't let the attention change him. Every morning he still arrived early, carrying his same old backpack and worn-out notebook. He still sat under the big oak tree during lunch, scribbling down melodies that came to his mind. To him, fame wasn't the goal. Peace was. One day, the principal made a special announcement over the school speakers. "Students," his voice echoed, "tomorrow we will have an appreciation assembly, a celebration of the spirit, talent, and unity we've all witnessed this semester." And yes, he added with a smile in his tone, Marcus Johnson will be performing once again. The moment those words left the speakers, cheers erupted across classrooms. Everyone was excited. This wasn't just another performance, this was a tribute to how far they had all come. That night, Marcus sat by the piano at home, his mother sitting nearby, sewing quietly. "You nervous?" she asked gently. Marcus smiled faintly. "A little," he admitted, "but not like before." She looked up at him, her eyes soft and proud. "You've already done the hardest part, baby. You showed them who you are. Tomorrow is just the world clapping for the truth." He nodded, letting her words sink in. He practiced a few final notes, the sound filling their small apartment with warmth. Then, before bed, he wrote 3 words in his notebook: "Play with heart." The next morning, the auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat and teachers stood along the walls. The stage lights glowed softly and the air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone remembered the first time Marcus had been on that stage, called up as a prank. Now he was walking onto it as a hero. When Marcus stepped through the curtain, the crowd burst into applause before he even played a single note. His heart swelled. He wasn't scared this time. He felt calm, peaceful even. He walked to the piano and placed his hands on the same keys that once carried his fear. He took a deep breath, looked up briefly, and saw the principal standing near the stage, smiling proudly. Then, Marcus began to play. The melody he chose was new, gentle at first, then rich and full, like the sound of sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't a sad song or even a powerful one. It was thankful. Every note was a message. Gratitude for his mother, forgiveness for the principal, appreciation for his classmates, and love for music itself. The audience sat completely still. Even the air felt thick with emotion. Students who used to laugh at him now looked at him with admiration. Some had tears in their eyes. As he played, Marcus thought of everything that had happened. The laughter, the silence, the first performance, the second, the words of his mother, the apology of his principal. Every memory flowed through his hands like water, turning pain into art. When he finally reached the end of the song, he pressed the last note with both hands, soft but steady. It echoed gently through the hall, fading into a silence that felt sacred. For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if time had stopped again, just like that first day. Then, suddenly, the room exploded. The students rose from their seats, clapping wildly. Some shouted his name, others whistled, and a few simply stood with tears streaming down their faces. Teachers joined in, cheering loudly. Even the janitor, who stood by the back door, was clapping with a wide grin. The sound was deafening. Not of laughter this time, but of love. Marcus stood slowly and gave a small bow. His cheeks flushed, but his heart felt full. As he looked out at the sea of faces cheering for him, he realized this wasn't just his standing ovation. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt small, who had ever been doubted, who had ever been told they weren't enough. Then, the crowd parted slightly as Principal Reynolds walked up onto the stage. He approached Marcus, microphone in hand, and for a moment the room went quiet again. He smiled warmly and said, "Marcus Johnson, you've reminded us all what true strength looks like. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that speaks softly through kindness, through grace, and through music. On behalf of the entire school, thank you." He extended his hand. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then shook it with a humble smile. The crowd roared again, louder than ever. In that single moment, standing under the bright lights, surrounded by applause, respect, and love, Marcus felt something beautiful bloom inside him. It wasn't pride. It was peace. He had walked into this school as a boy no one noticed. Now, he stood as a young man who had taught everyone the power of humility and heart. As the applause continued to thunder, Marcus glanced toward his mother sitting in the front row. She was crying, smiling through her tears, clapping harder than anyone else. He placed his hand over his heart and mouthed, "For you, Mom." And that day, the sound of the standing ovation wasn't just for his music. It was for his courage, his kindness, his truth. Because sometimes one person's quiet bravery can turn the noise of the world into a song.